As a result of this this attack, NATO is on full alert. Is on alert along the border of Macedonia, just over the border from Kosovo. Tanks have been patrolling throughout the day.
NATO planes for today's operation was stationed at Aviano Air Base in northern Italy. About 80 warplanes took off from the base, and CNN's Jim Bitterman was there.
Shortly before the first strike aircraft took off from Aviano, reporters were conducted onto the base with the condition that there be no contact with the outside world until after the raids on Yugoslavia were officially confirmed. What then followed was an hour-and-a-half display of some of the most sophisticated and expensive hardware in the NATO arsenal as the plane took off in almost continual motion. F-15 fighters and F-16 fighter bombers, electronic warfare aircraft, and even some combat support planes. Shortly after sunset, the first of 10 F-117 stealth bombers left Aviano. If the attack went according to plan, the radar-evading aircraft were headed for some of the most difficult targets on NATO's list. One Air Force officer roughly calculated that $1 billion in aircraft had taken to the skies. And then, after 90 minutes of roaring takeoffs, the base momentarily went quiet.
We and our allies have a chance.
In a hangar at one corner of the base, Air Force personnel and reporters listened as President Clinton officially announced the raids were underway. It was the first time in NATO's history that alliance personnel were going into offensive action against a sovereign nation. And it was not at all certain as the planes were leaving here that they alone can solve Kosovo's problems. And as the evening wore on, the base was once again coming alive with takeoffs and landings, continuing long into the night. Jim Bitterman, CNN, Aviano, Italy.
A fear fit for a map. First, look at neighboring Macedonia. 30% of its population are ethnic Albanians. If they were to take up arms in support of fellow Albanians fighting in Kosovo to create a greater Albania, that would threaten Macedonia's existence. Because the neighboring Bulgarians, who are ethnic cousins of the Macedonians, might then be tempted to seize the rest of a weakened Macedonia, which in turn would frighten Greece, which has fought 2 wars with Bulgaria over, you guessed it, Macedonia.
The Greek concern is that the Bulgarian influence in Macedonia will increase, that the Albanian influence in Macedonia will increase. Therefore, it will be surrounded by enemies, Turkey, Bulgaria, Albania.
Did someone say Turkey? It could enter the spreading conflict to support its fellow Muslims, the ethnic Albanians. That would pit Turkey and Greece, longtime enemies, on opposite sides of a Balkan war.
That's the big fear, 2 NATO partners fighting each other. All of this could happen as the Balkan dominoes tumble, or none of it may happen. The key is Macedonia.
That is why there have been several hundred American troops in Macedonia since 1993, a symbolic show of support for stability.
If there is a domino, the #1 domino is Macedonia. If we can halt the destabilization of Macedonia, for example, by providing economic assistance to deal with refugees, I think we can stop the spreading of the war.
So if the ethnic Albanians in Macedonia can be persuaded not to enter the conflict in Kosovo, it is less likely the horrors of Kosovo and what happened in Bosnia will spread to the rest of the Balkans. But in the Balkans, that, as always, is a big and unpredictable if. Garrick Utley, CNN, New York.
With more. I understand some 80 planes took off from there last night. Are they all back safely?
Yes, let me confirm that. First and foremost, all the planes that took off from here at Aviano last night to attack the positions in Serbia did return safely. At the moment, the skies above Aviano's NATO airbase are quiet, as you can see. What's happening now is that the combat crews are being debriefed, the planes are being rearmed, refueled, and then the missions will be set out for the next strike.
And mainly US planes, David?
Mainly US planes, but of course one of the most important things here is that the Luftwaffe was in action for the first time since the Second World War. German planes did take part in the actual strikes against Serbian targets. and that is the first time in 50 years they have been in combat. And they are just one of 8 nations that were taking part in the combat operations over Serbia. At the moment, we don't know if any more will be involved in tonight's strikes.
Do you get any sense of the mood there yet, David? Have you spoken to any of the pilots on their return?
No, they're still too busy being debriefed. They're still trying to assess exactly what damage they did to the Serbian air defense systems. Of course, they're worried about one thing, that the Serbian air defense systems are relatively sophisticated. They're also very robust, and the point was being made by defense experts just before I started talking to you, that it's taken several months for the Allies to hit against targets in Iraq, and they still haven't made a real impact on their defense systems. So the pilots tonight, when they take off from this Aviano NATO airbase, will once again be in harm's way. There's no doubt about that.
Cruise missile. Defense Secretary William Cohen told us at a news conference yesterday that the targets that they were hitting were military targets.
We are attacking the military infrastructure that President Milosevic and his forces are using to repress and kill innocent people. NATO forces are not attacking the people of Yugoslavia. They are attacking the military forces that are responsible for the killing and the carnage in Kosovo.
Man-made sun. The first Tomahawk cruise missile lifted off shortly before 7 p.m. local time, its booster rocket arcing into the air, signaling the fiery start of its journey. 8 more missiles followed, launched from both the forward and aft section of this Aegis-class cruiser located off the coast of Croatia. The booster rockets eventually wink out, marking the Tomahawk's transition to subsonic flight. It could take minutes. It could take more than an hour to strike its target, depending on its circuitous route.
A lot of people were focused. It was about 4.5, 5 hours of solid focus on your job. Maintain a high level of attention to the task at hand.
The Tomahawk carries a 1,000-pound warhead designed to take out hardened targets. The crew of the Philippine Sea has no idea where its final destination will be, just as those on the receiving end have no idea of its approach. From all appearances on board ship, all went according to plan.
The crew performed beautifully. Their long hours of training, their weeks and months of training, their time away from their families devoted to their ship really paid off today.
For the USS Philippine Sea, this was the ship's first time into combat since the Gulf War in 1991. For most of her crew, though, this was their first time into combat ever.
At the time we counted down to launch, it kind of was a sinking feeling in my stomach, but you know, we knew it was coming.
Prior to the strike, not even the ship's captain had seen a Tomahawk launch before. Now he and the rest of the crew wonder how many more they will see before their mission is done. Martin Savage, CNN, aboard the USS Philippine Sea in the Adriatic.
But there might be a link to the report that an F-15 trailing white smoke has been forced to land in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo. But I can't confirm that those two incidents are in fact related. But at the moment here at the airbase, it's relatively quiet. The pilots have been going through their debriefings from their combat missions, and they're now watching as their planes are being rearmed and refueled, and they're being given their instructions for their next missions, which will start, if it's anything like yesterday, just before dusk falls here at Aviano in northeast Italy.
Obviously, we are being led to believe, yes, that the operation continues tonight. At a press conference earlier, hints that the sorties would be less risky, although, of course, just flying a plane of this nature is not without its risks.
Well, I think it's been proved from what we've seen with Allied air attacks in Iraq that air defense systems can be robust, and certainly the Serbian air defense systems are robust, and they do have dangers still for the Allied pilots that will be flying over there perhaps tonight, perhaps only in about 4 hours' time. Most dangerous, of course, are the mobile SAM-6 units, because they can't be struck by bombs or cruise missiles. That's why the EA-6B, which you can see behind me, the Prowler aircraft, its speciality is electronic warfare, is used to go ahead of the planes, to go ahead of the missions. So if the SAM units lock on to any pilots, they will take them out.
David Chater, thank you very much. David Chater reporting from Aviano.
The B-52 bombers shows the 8 aircraft all returning safely to their British base in Gloucestershire. The cruise missiles which slammed into targets throughout former Yugoslavia almost certainly were launched from these huge warplanes. Along with RAF Harriers, they were involved in the first wave of attacks.
We're trained to do a job, and when we can do that job well, it always, you know, gives you some little bit of elation. But like you say, you don't want to go too much further than that.
This morning there were the necessary checks to ensure all were in order. The fresh cruise missiles on standby waiting to be loaded. The NATO troops massing on the Macedonian border with Kosovo have been anxiously redeploying troops for fear of Serbian reprisals. The British Prime Minister went on Forces radio to thank troops for their efforts and warn the Serbs against any retaliation.
We are also giving a very clear and stark warning to Milosevic that if he attempts to retaliate in any way at all against NATO forces in other parts of this region, then our response to that will be immediate and it will be very severe indeed.
And with the Russians furious at NATO's actions, he acknowledged he had diplomatic bridges to build.
We understand the position of Russia. I want to speak to the Russian Prime Minister, Mr. Primakov, at some point in time today. And we understand their concerns, but the very reason we're taking action is to prevent a humanitarian disaster.
This morning, his Defence Secretary and the Deputy Prime Minister met the top officials in the Ministry of Defence to get a first-hand account of how the mission went. And George Robertson warned the bombings will continue until the Serbian leader can do no more harm.
These obviously pictures that came in from last night. The targets, obviously, the Kosovo capital, Pristina.
Well, let's get the view now.
Tornadoes were also used in the Gulf War. The Germans, this is their first combat mission since the end of World War II. This is a very historic time. They feel themselves they can actually undertake offensive missions. Previously, especially in the former Yugoslavia, Germany has been very nervous about undertaking even peacekeeping because of their history there during World War II. The fact they now feel they can have combat aircraft in combat missions, that is, as I say, a piece of history. And in this particular case, they weren't used for direct, as were, bombing in the way RAF Tornadoes have in the past. There's a German and Italian variant of the Tornado called the ECR, the Electronic Combat Reconnaissance. They're equipped with anti-radar missiles, jamming pods, and their specific mission is to attack enemy radar sites, enemy surface-to-air missile batteries, and indeed, all the reports we've had suggest they were working alongside other NATO aircraft to perform exactly that mission and seem to have done a very good job.
But that
in Yugoslavia, numbers and estimates of how many there are vary. Probably a couple of dozen, 3 dozen. It's a worry because it is a very manoeuvrable, very capable aircraft, though with the proviso if the pilot flying it is any good. If the pilot is not well trained, is not had enough currency on the aircraft, then he's not, the whole aircraft system is going to be pretty bad. They did seem to come up last night. They got involved, and the first reports, none of which have been fully confirmed, are that 2 probably shot down by United States Air Force F-15s, and 1 probably shot down by a Netherlands F-16. So those are the first reports of air-to-air combat. Again, slight difference from the Gulf War, where the Iraqis made very little attempt to come up in the air and contest it. The Yugoslavs seem to have been a bit more, they seem to have been concerned to do this.
Damages or casualties to people who are not involved. What we're targeting here are the military security forces and the associated facilities. We're taking all possible measures to minimize collateral damage, damage to innocent civilians or nearby property that's not associated with the target. We obviously want to have the maximum effect on their ability to prosecute these offensive operations against their own people and cause this humanitarian tragedy. But we're starting with the integrated air defense system, the anti-aircraft sites, command and control facilities, and infrastructure, and we'll be then progressively, as I said, and systematically moving from there. Now, just a few words about the operation. As the Secretary General has said, it was an Allied operation. I think it was very well planned and organized. The sorties the ships, all of this came together on time. It was very well rehearsed before it began, and it's the culmination of a long period of planning, frankly. There was not a lot of air defense fire at the ingressing forces. Frankly, we know what his air defense system is. We know he has some formidable capabilities. We just didn't see them last night. But I want to emphasize that operations like this cannot be conducted without risk. Last night, the principal opposition seemed to be some fighter aircraft that were brought up against us. We did detect and engage these aircraft. At least 3 were destroyed, including some of the most modern and capable aircraft in his inventory. All NATO planes successfully and safely returned to their bases. I know there's been an issue today about an F-15 that sat down with engine problem in Sarajevo. It was a routine maintenance issue and had nothing to do with any engagement with the enemy. But I do want to salute the brave men and women who flew in harm's way on that mission and their missions last night, and the superb leadership and staff work that are evident throughout the many, many parts of Allied Command Europe and national structures which are supporting this operation.
The NATO troops here up until these airstrikes now many Macedonians, and I must add that this doesn't represent the point of view of the Macedonian government, just a group of angry protesters we've been seeing today. Many Macedonians feel that the mark has been overstepped. Relitza?
Matthew, how strong are the concerns of a possible spillover of the conflict in Kosovo on Macedonian soil, and does this have to do with those protests too?
Well, I can tell you there's a great deal of unease here about the possibility of the war in Kosovo spilling over here. There are, remember, an ethnic minority of about 25% ethnic Albanians here. It's very easy for many Macedonians to see a scenario in which the ethnic Albanians here in Macedonia join with the ethnic Albanians now fighting in Kosovo in a much wider regional war. But there's also concern that the very presence of NATO troops here at a time of conflict, really, between NATO and Yugoslavia is an invitation, perhaps, for the Yugoslav authorities to take reprisals against Macedonia, if only against the NATO troops here, in response to their giving NATO some kind of base in the region. Relitza?
Last month. They now find themselves playing a key role in this latest conflict. The RAF safe families of the service personnel on the Cambridgeshire base are receiving help and support from welfare officers. In the adjoining village, local people say the atmosphere is tense.
People are more pensive and worried, you know, about what might happen.
People don't really say very much about it, you know, it's all part of service life.
The squadron dates back to 1912, when it was number 1 Airship Squadron of the Royal Flying Corps. Number 1 Fighter Squadron was the first in the world to use the Harrier jump jet. They now have 8 of the latest generation of Harrier GR7s, currently based in Italy and very much involved in this latest conflict. So far, 6 of the GR7s have been in action. They carry 1,000 and 2,000 pound Paveway 2 and Paveway 3 bombs, which were used against the Iraqis in the Gulf War. They're also armed with Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Back at the UK base, they're confidently waiting for the safe return of their pilots. David Crabtree, Sky News, RAF Wittering in Cambridgeshire.
As part of the NATO force use that aircraft. Well, if we base this on what happened yesterday, where we timed the first strikes hitting at about 7:10 in the evening, it's about 10 to 5 now. If you assume it is give or take an hour and a half flight time, 2 hours flight time to many of the targets, that takes you to pretty much just short of 7 o'clock. Yes, you would expect people to be taking off about now, though, unlike yesterday, there's been no movement by the B-52s at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire.
hour round trip, but there are other B-2s there that could be taking place. Pentagon sources indicate, and U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen indicated this morning, that tonight's attacks could be more intense than the first night. We'll have to see what is in store. The Pentagon is watching the situation carefully, including the aftermath of these.
For 38 days, and he didn't withdraw from Kuwait until we launched ground forces. And so what